Sleeping and my dog.
It's amazing.
Some people call it re-streaming.
Well, the 15 minutes isn't over, but everybody's back, so we're going to get started.
Almost. Alan's not back.
Huh?
We're missing Alan.
Okay. All right, we're going to get started now, and Ms. Taylor, I recognize you for the Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee report.
Thank you, Chairman Kobe. I am Becky Taylor, and along with Mr. Wayne McDevitt, we do chair the EICS committee, and we do have two actionable first read items that I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting. They're pretty standard requests. EICS 5. This was a request from Lakeside Preparatory Academy, is a request to amend their mission statement. This is a school that had changed their name. I know you probably remember Thunderbird, and we approved a change to Lakeside. They're just trying to rebrand and being more concise and clear about their mission statement. So I move that the State Board of Education approve the mission change for Lakeside Preparatory Academy.
And there was some confusion. They had the same name as the
Yes,
other.
right.
Okay, motion by Ms. Taylor, second by Mr. McDevitt. All those in favor of approving EICS 5, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed, no. Motion stands approved. Ms. Taylor.
Okay, and then EICS 6 was another request, Franklin Academy's request to change their mission statement and learning outcomes. They're actually just adding in an emphasis on character education, which is a really good thing. So I move that the State Board of Education approve the amended changes for Franklin Academy.
A motion by Ms. Taylor, second by Mr. B.
second.
Oh, second by Ms. White. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed, no. The motion stands approved. Ms. Taylor.
All right, we'll move into our action items. EICS 1, last month, Mr. Alex Quigley and Mr. Stephen Walker, Chair and Vice Chair of the CSAB, presented the 2018 Charter School application recommendations. There were 29 applications that the CSAB reviewed, went through the process, spent a lot of time on, and at this time I would like to move that the State Board of Education accept these recommendations for the applicants, including those schools recommended to receive a charter to open in 2019-20, contingent upon the successful completion of their planning year requirements.
Motion by Ms. Taylor, second by Mr. McDevitt. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed, no. Motion stands approved. Ms. Taylor.
EICS 2, last month, Dr. Deanna Townsend Smith presented the 2018 proposed changes to the charter school application, timeline process, and charter agreement. And there, I just want to point out the two changes that are posted on the e-board. To revise the timeline, moving it forward 1 week on the beginning and then moving it 1 week on the end. So I just want to call that to everyone's attention. And I move that we approve the proposed timeline and process.
Okay, motion by Ms. Taylor, second by Mr. McDevitt. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed, no. Motion stands approved. Ms. Taylor.
And EICS 3, the Innovative School District update on the ISD operator. Dr. Hall is going to provide an overview of their contract So I'd like to ask him to come forward at this time.
Good morning, Chairman Kobe, Vice Chairman Davis, Superintendent Johnson, members of the board, the advisory, and citizens of North Carolina. As you may recall, last month, we moved forward with the recommendation for our first innovative school operator. And today I stand before you to present and talk about the contract that helps to define the relationship, the expectations, and the overall accountability for this partner in supporting us in the operation of Southside Ashpole in Roland, North Carolina. As you review the contract, it is established, of course, in alignment with statute that indicates that this will be a 5-year agreement set to terminate on June 30th, 2023, unless actions are taken otherwise. That could be including a termination or stipulations within the statute that does allow for potential renewal for up to 3 years. As you go through the contract, again, these things are outlined, again, regarding the renewal, the termination, as well as a clause that talks about the termination for convenience. The other responsibilities that you look at, particularly in Section 6, help to outline overall scope of work and the things that the operator will be expected to do in providing the services and the supports that they outline, not only in their application and their supplemental information through the evaluation process, but also things that we pulled directly from statute itself. You know, that outlines things like services for exceptional children, the direct roles and conditions of the operator, everything regarding curriculum and instruction, the professional development being provided to our team members working in the school, things around school culture, the student handbook, school safety, security, everything that we know goes into supporting and managing a highly effective, high-quality school. In addition to those things, the state board attorneys, myself, have worked diligently to make sure that we address the stipulations that were discussed in last month's meeting, with many things coming back to the ISD superintendent for final approval and decision-making, and if we need to make adjustments or changes over time, then we can do that. That was something that I know last month we had some pretty, I think, healthy conversation around concerns that came from the board, and we've really, I think, worked to mitigate that through the contracting process. In addition, looking at things like the school principal selection. Again, that was one of the stipulations that we discussed as well last month. In no surprise, including compliance with state and federal laws. All of those things are a part of this agreement, and things that are getting a little bit more specific are attached in a document that is Exhibit A and Exhibit B. Exhibit A provides specific details, multiple pages of things that were pulled directly from the application and the supplemental documents provided. And then the management fee, also with the budget that we requested to show what are the expected expenditures from the management fee, with an expectation to monitor those expenditures on a quarterly basis that would come in as part of the invoice for the next quarterly installment of the management fee. So with that, I want to pause and see if there's questions. I will say that there's two things I want to point out that are also part of this contract, is that the operator itself will be funded for two specific roles. One is their management fee. The other thing will be the funding associated with the salary and benefits for the school principal. Beyond that, all financial management and administration will be on the ISD, and we will manage and administer like any other LEA in the state. And through this contract, we'll fund the operator for those two particular categories of funds. And if there are additional operational expenses, you know, whether it's school supplies, office supplies for the school itself, those are things that we will administer directly through the ISD. So with that, I will pause for questions, comment, and
Ms. Willoughby?
I just wanted to clarify, I'm not going to reiterate my many concerns that I spoke about last month, but I want to make sure that what you just said, the management company is not paying the principal.
so the management company, in the statute itself, it says that they do hire the principal.
They hire the principal, but I'm talking about under number 17, the state board will provide funds to the operator for the principal's salary and benefits and other operational costs as approved by you.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's in addition to the $100,000.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to be clear, because it was kind of the way.
Appreciate the
I know
clarification.
you never mean to mislead us.
No,
I'm
ma'am.
not suggesting that at all. I trust you. But just to make sure we know, and just as another, my little chart from last time I did for myself is we've got the state board and the superintendent, we've got you, we've got the management company, we've got team CFA, we've got a principal. That's a lot of layers down before we get to those children at that school. So I just want to make sure that, you know, we're cognizant of and I mean, that part's over. I understand my concerns last month, that, you know, notwithstanding, we're moving forward with this, but I just want to clarify that the principal salary is in addition to.
It is. So the management, that's what I was getting at, is that there's really two things that are funded to the operator. One is the management fee, and in Exhibit B, you will see a budget reflecting that management fee.
Right.
And then there's the salary and benefits for the principal.
It's clear in the document. I just wanted to make sure
Yes,
that
ma'am.
it was clearly heard.
Thank you, Ms. Willoughby. Mr. McDevitt, and then Dr. Oxenden.
My concerns are generated from really the same place as Tricia's, that that org chart, as she said, state board and superintendent, in that box that you had at the top of that slide last
Yes, sir.
last month, and then the ISD, IEU, and then the AAC, the operator, and then the team CFA, and then since then, at least in public reporting, I've seen that there are other consultants kind of involved in some of the different pieces there, and then there's the principal. And I think anyone here would say that the real key to the turnaround, the future of that school, these kids, is that principal. And so my concern, I guess, at this point is when I see the operator shall, the operator shall, the operator shall, and the ISD approval and all that, I just want to hear some commentary regarding monitoring and oversight. And I, you know, like she said, I trust you, but there's just one of you, and then this is going to expand. I mean, there are going to be more schools for this superintendent to have to oversee, and so I don't want to answer my own question, but there are also just things in there that have been raised even since last month. You know, some issues that were in some reporting regarding kids with special needs and those things that I think are real important to have that commentary at this table, so that we're assuring for all of us that there is the proper monitoring and oversight.
So I'll tease apart a couple different questions that I hear within that statement. So I think the first one is regarding anybody that's a subcontractor or doing any services for AAC. Anything in there, it does come back to where saying the ISD superintendent can intervene and be involved in anything that needs to change within the program, including professional development and things of that nature. So we are putting those types of, you know, what I would say procedural safeguards in place to ensure that we are doing what we need to do on behalf of the students and the staff at the school. I think in addition to that, when we talk about what the operator shall, when we talk about CFA, in the end, the principal reports to AAC. And so they're hired by AAC. CFA is a portion of the discussion providing very specific services to AAC, to the school itself, things like training for the teachers, instructional coaches that will come in and support the staff in delivering those services. So there's some very specific things that CFA is involved in, whereas AAC is not necessarily another, you know, cog in the chain of command, because it would be the principal reporting to AAC and then up to the superintendent. So I think with that, we included the expectations that the hiring or removal or any changes in the school principal comes back to the ISD superintendent for approval. And in addition, once the contract is finalized, we will have a contract monitoring tool that aligns with monthly reporting, quarterly reporting, on-site visits, and things that we look at with state and federal guidelines to ensure compliance with everything from exceptional children to federal programs, and be able to come back to the board and report on that on a quarterly basis with how we're doing.
Thank you, Mary.
Dr. Oxenden.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. In my opinion, it seems like two things will make a difference at Southside Asheville. Number one, the principal. Number two, the infrastructure of that school. When by that, I mean the instructional components must be right. And one of the things that I've said a couple of times is I'd like to see more than one instructional coach hired to work in that school, because I think we need one at K2. K2 is, there are many moving parts in K2 with all the assessments. And then another instructional coach for the upper grades, 3-5. So I'm concerned about the same concerns that have been shared by my colleagues to the right, but I'm also concerned, mainly concerned, about what needs to happen in terms of instruction. Instructional support, it's all about location, okay, it's all about instructional support. So that's where I want to know that the dollars are being spent, because that's what's missing in the school. I guarantee you, that's missing.
And the budget does call for a full-time instructional coach on staff, which the school does not currently have. There's also a partnership with UNCP right now that has a instructional coach going there on a part-time basis, and we would hope to continue that relationship with the university. But Team CFA also has a team of 5 instructional coaches that will be going into the school on a regular basis to provide additional support through their relationship as a free service to AAC through that model. So we do hope to be able, to your point, provide a good, strong instructional coaching. And as we get through this first year, where we're a little bit different than some typical or traditional LEAs, is that we have a pretty finite budget when it comes to school operations. So when you think about the dollars that are allotted for teachers, the dollars that are allotted for any other support services, year one's going to be something where we have a lot to learn to see just exactly the revenues that are generated and how those revenues are expended on the personnel inside the school. And as we look at the federal funds that will be allotted, to see how we can put additional resources like instructional coach and other things into the school if we can go beyond what we currently have in there.
And the other, if I might add, just another question or comment, is that whoever provides the professional development, and I think you said that would be AAC, would be the primary provider.
Team CFA going to AAC as their partner through this relationship will be providing the instructional coach and things of that nature, the additional instructional coaching
Right.
and professional development.
I think it will be real important to have consistency in those providers so that the teachers become familiar with whoever is leading workshops or PLCs, and they develop a relationship with those providers and feel comfortable to ask questions and say, I need help.
Completely agree.
That's my final comment.
Thank you. Mr. Griffin?
During our recent visit to Southside Ashpole, I noticed that there were some things that need to be fixed structurally. So who does that fall back on?
If we're talking about like actual facility,
Yes.
that's part of the discussion in my next presentation with Public Schools of Robeson County and how we collaborate on those types of opportunities and things at the school itself.
By the way, we had a nice afternoon, Jason and I, and Dr. Hall on the campus at Southside about 3 weeks ago.
Any other questions or comments?
Just in
Yes.
Mr. Alcorn's absence, I just want us to be very aware of the return on investment here and how we look at that, say, a year from now. So since Greg's not here, I'm going to say ROI.
Okay, thank you. Ms. White?
I heard that.
He's here.
Creeping over there.
I feel like I've been stalked.
So, Ms. Willoughby, if you weren't here, I would be asking this question for you.
Thank you.
I noticed that Southside Ashpole does have a pre-K program.
It does.
Will AAC and its team be responsible for administrating the instruction at pre-K, or where does ownership lie there? Because I do feel like that's a critical piece moving forward, as in whatever it is, in the contract you talk about 3 years of consecutive growth. And so I know that starts in pre-K.
Thank you, Ms. White.
You're welcome.
That was also part of my next presentation, but I
Okay,
will go ahead and
no
address it
problem.
here. We did engage in conversations with the local school system to maintain the pre-K program that is on site, and it will remain under the Public Schools of Robeson County, and so they'll continue to operate that program in partnership with us at the school.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, I would like to say one more thing about the contract. I know that Mr. Hall has worked very close with legal, and they've spent lots and lots of time on this contract, and I think it's a very good contract. I think you've put in lots of safeguards to, reassure anybody who has any doubts or questions of making the right decisions. And as Dr. Oxendine said, instruction. I agree, and it needs to be our children. Those need to be our areas of focus. So at this time, I move that the State Board of Education finalize the pending contract with AAC.
Approve. Or
Yes. Well, it's-
authorize the superintendent to sign the
Yeah, because he's
contract.
got to, the superintendent will sign this.
Okay.
So
But-
that will be his finalized, I guess.
Okay, so,
I move the State Board of Education approve the pending contract be finalized by our superintendent's signature.
okay.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Taylor, second by Ms. White. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed, no. Motion stands approved. Ms. Taylor.
All right, I'm going to ask Dr. Hall to stay here, even though he is not the next item under discussion, so that he can go ahead and address EICS 7, and this will be his update and overview of the ISD startup activities and kind of an overview of the draft of the MOU.
Correct. Again, good morning and appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk about this item. This is really an exciting time because we are at a point where, we're not only starting with our first school, we really are launching a statewide LEA, a statewide school system. And that takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of energy on behalf of a lot of individuals. A couple months ago, we've been trying to figure out what does this look like from a financial administration standpoint? What does this look like when it comes to managing HR services? And so I say all that to say here at the very beginning, I have to recognize some individuals that have been really significantly involved in helping us navigate that within the department between, the business and finance division with Adam and his team, and Alexis, Mira, Sam, so many individuals helping us understand what does it mean to build out the financial capacity and systems to do this kind of work, and something that's brand new to our state and to this agency, as well as, when you think about Claire and her team in HR, that's been very helpful as we navigate this, and of course, no doubt, in working with Dr. Petrie Martin, Dr. Barber, and others. This has really been a fascinating experience, and it's taken a team effort to get us to this point, which is why it's kind of amazing to see that we're official. When you look at the fact that we have a document from the department that acknowledges us and identifies us as LEA number 295 here in the state of North Carolina as the 116th school system here in our state. And so, first day of school is around the corner, August 27th, and we have a lot of things that we still have to do to get ready for that. But this, to us, when we got this document and we looked at this, it's kind of like that teenager who gets their driver's license for the first time. It makes you feel like you're real. While legislation has established us for quite some time, these are the next major steps that take us into getting ready for this school year and for the work that we'll be doing ahead in partnership with not only our local districts, but with the statewide community. So setting up financial management, that goes into how we set up financial reporting. Just like any other LEA, how do we draw down state and federal funds to administer and support these programs? Doing the things like Dr. Oxendine identified with being able to get the instructional coach and other things that we would want to have in the school. How do we use those resources in a way that create the greatest return on investment to the students and to the local community and the work that we're doing? Even payroll and benefits, because all the staff at the school, with the exception of cafeteria staff that will remain under the local school system, the pre-K program staff that will remain under the local school system, and the custodial staff that are going to remain under the local school system, some things we're contracting because it just makes sense to keep those things in place. And so those are all things that we are working through because, again, the employees of the ISD will be administered and everything through our payroll system at the ISD so that we can do what we need to do on behalf of supporting our team members and administering their benefits. Same thing with HR. When you think about teacher contracts, things that we will have to do to support our educators in the school, the job descriptions that are being created, everything that goes into starting up any new system are all things that we're engaged in this point in time. And hopefully over the next week to 2 weeks here, we will be at a point where we'll see our first round of job postings go out to recruit the educators and the staff and look at the staff that are at the school now that want to continue to be a part of this good work. And I do think in our visits, many of the staff members are hopeful to continue to be a part of this work. And how do we help support them in their capacity to really own this work, not only during the 5 years that we're there, but for the long haul and what we need to do for that school. So all of it is very exciting. It's very new, but it's also an opportunity for us to really craft this narrative at the beginning. And as we go from the HR processes and all the back office components that have to be established, the next thing coming is our website. In statute, it requires that we have a website that is managed by the ISD, and this gets into the transparency of our work, of how do we keep out front of everybody the documents, not only from our operators, but our processes, our systems, even down to the statute requiring that the contract with the principal is maintained on the website. So these are all elements that we will have to keep out there. We'll be out front, and we'll be very transparent like we have been so far, but it will be taking our website forward and excited about a launch that will come forward here in the next couple of weeks. But with that, it will also be the place where teachers and educators, support staff can go to using an applicant tracking system that will help to manage all the processes with having people apply and go through all the way to the point of hiring. So again, exciting stuff, but it's all things that take this LEA into the next phases of really being operational and ready to roll for the new school year. When we talk about the MOU, and Mr. Griffin, this comes back to your question even around facility. So Public Schools of Robeson County will be our partner, and through the MOU that we're establishing with them, we will talk about everything that goes into, if we have a facility issue, how do we report that back to the district, and we get those types of things addressed. There may be some things that are, if you think of it almost like a rental agreement, there are some things that are part of, a landlord, for example, that may take care of certain things, but there may be some things that the person occupying that space through the agreement might do themselves. But we have to be very cognizant of the fact that in the end, that is a local asset, and we want to respect that asset. In anything that we do as upgrades, we get approval from the school system first in doing those things. But some things will be things that we will talk to the district about doing as we prepare for startup in the new school year. But again, child nutrition services are in that MOU, the custodial and grounds maintenance services, because while it's a very, it's an older facility, I will tell you, the team there at the school, they do a good job of keeping the school clean. They really do. Does it have some facility needs? Yes. But the campus overall, it's a clean campus, it's a good environment, and the team there is doing a good job. So we want to be able to keep as many things in place and keep the continuity in place so that those team members can continue to do the work, and the district will bill us then for those custodial services for their costs. Technology and network services. With E-rate, for example, there's an infrastructure already in that building. How do we navigate that with the local school system and with the team here at DPI to make sure we have those elements outlined and ready to roll? Itinerant services like school nurse, school social worker, other things that are already in place through the partnership with the school system, and then looking at what other funding and shared services we'll have in this MOU. And these are things that we're working hand in hand with Dr. Wooten, who's the superintendent of the district, and working with her team as we navigate all of these pieces. We'll have a separate MOU with a speech and language service provider that is already working at the school. Again, when you talk about continuity of services, they also serve the middle school. So as students transition from our school to the middle school, we'll have that continuity in place. But that will be a separate MOU between us and that provider to ensure those services are in place for the students at the school. Yes,
Dr.
ma'am.
Oxidine has a question.
Yes, my question in the MOU, how specific is the language about, we expect this to happen, here would be my term, we expect this to happen by such and such date? Because there are some real glaring needs. Mr. Griffin just alluded to that on that campus. Like there's no security system. A lot of space for a nice playground, but it's just an empty lot, basically. So, how firm? It needs to be a firm MOU to make sure these things happen, and they happen timely.
We do have some timelines within the statute, or within the MOU that talks about like a 5-day turnaround as far as a response from the district so that we can get clarification. And this is that balance, right? It's between what are things that we definitely want to see for our students at the school, and which things are things that fall into their capital plan already within the district, and not making sure that we don't go forward with anything that's, an undue burden on the district either with additional costs that maybe they weren't projecting for that facility. So some things we will have to negotiate to see which things do we pick up as the ISD to put in that school, using the resources available. That continues to remain as an asset at that school. And in which case, we will have to negotiate those things on an as-needed basis with each item on the list that we will develop.
Right, because the last thing we want to see happen, and I'm not suggesting this is going to happen, I just want to get it out on the table now, is that Ashpole is the last on the list to be serviced by the public schools of Robeson County. Don't want that to happen. And that comes about during negotiations.
It does. And I do have great confidence, and I think by maintaining the maintenance team and the grounds maintenance team on the staff that are employed by the district, it helps make sure we have an automatic connection back to district leadership through that chain of command to have those issues addressed at the campus itself.
Thank you.
And so those are the key things when we talk about the MOU. These are all things that are in there, as well as, again, the funding and shared services that we will have with the district. But by next month, my goal would be to come back to the state board with an MOU ready for approval as we finalize steps and activities with the local school system and the local school board. Other things that I'll say in the meantime that we continue to work on is, I've talked about the financial management, the HR services, all of those pieces, is the ongoing work with the community. We are working very closely with town leadership. There's faith leaders, a faith council. We have a meeting coming up on May 21st where a group of local faith leaders are coming together as part of a council to talk about how we can have that kind of engagement and maintain those high levels of engagement with the work that's emerging. And, in addition to that, I know oftentimes there's these perceptions of, conflict or controversy. And I would tell you that is just not the case if you're in Robeson County or in Roland as we're doing our work. I mean, even to the point where the superintendent of the school system has asked me to serve on her advisory panel and her advisory committee as they're crafting their strategic plan and their vision. Was fortunate to be down there just this past Monday evening working with her leadership team, and members of the local community and what that looks like. So it really is a strong collaboration. It's a partnership, and we're all learning this work together, hand in hand, as we continue to not only do things at Southside Ashpole, but how do we take the lessons learned and what we're going to do at Southside Ashpole and hopefully bridge some of that across other low-performing schools in the district to really create a district-wide learning community that's focused on improving outcomes across multiple schools. And that gets into the I-Zone strategy, which we know the district has engaged conversations. And when we think about some of the research that's coming out of places like Tennessee, we know that the zone strategies are proving to be very effective. And they're showing good signs of improvement. And so we want to be able to bring that same type of research base into these discussions as we continue to partner with the community and the local school system. Partners also, and I said this at the beginning, I just have to be honest, this has been an unbelievable journey. It's been one that I know it's amazing to think that we're 10 months into this process now and getting ready to start our first school. But again, I can't reiterate this enough that it would not happen if it were not for the people in this building helping us navigate a lot of tough things and something that's new, and in some cases, language that's hard to, operationalize in some cases. But we've worked through it, and we're continuing to work through it. And I'm very proud of, again, the opportunity to be a part of that discussion and working with the team in this building. But even when we think about the continuum of work that the ISD is involved in here in North Carolina, and when we think about our collaboration with Educator Support Services, we really are a team working in this hand in hand. So in fact, fortunate that we had a grant that the ISD solicited with a foundation in rural North Carolina. It really focused on rural eastern North Carolina. And they stepped up to invest in an opportunity for Dr. Barber, Dr. James Ellaby on her team, and myself to go to Harvard this summer to be a part of a national school turnaround leadership group to continue our work. And so they're sponsoring that trip for us to go in and do that kind of work together. And so we're proud of that because I think it does show that the ISD, we are committed to being a partner in this whole body of work around schools. And we want to continue to be that type of partner and engage in those partnerships in a way that help all of us to build stronger capacity in support of the schools and the students across North Carolina. And so we're going to continue with our collaboration there. We have great collaborations emerging with UNC Pembroke. And so more great things are ahead. And just appreciate the board for your continued support, your engagement in this process, and look forward to reporting more on the good work that's ahead in the months to come.
Ms. Wilby, you had one more?
Just as I said a while ago about the whole child model, I think given the numbers we just heard about the 800% increase in homeless children in Robeson County, I hope that that becomes not just an implied part of the conversation, but an intentional part of helping that one school with the community.
Those are values I bring with me into this work, and very proud to co-chair the whole child committee with Dr. Maria Petrie-Martin, and it's not just an implied, but it will be an explicit part of what we want to accomplish at Southside.
Thank you, Dr. Hall, and I know you'll come back to us in June with another update.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to jump back to EICS 4, discussion item. Mr. Dave Machado is going to present this item on the Raleigh Oak Charter Schools request to amend change its enrollment expansion project.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Chairman Colby, Vice Chair Davis, Superintendent Johnson, and Dr. Deanna Townsend-Smith. Let me compliment you on your fantastic choice in hire. Can you help me one more time before I? Raleigh Oak Charter is asking for an increase in their enrollment. This is a school that is in Southwest Wake. It's scheduled to open this August, and they're asking to increase their enrollment for several reasons. One is they have the applications and the interest to increase their enrollment. They also have realize how expensive facilities are, and they needed extra, the students for the extra income, and it helps them implement their 5-year plan much better with the additional students. CSAB has discussed this strongly with them, and they are recommending it. When they came for their application process through to CSAB, CSAB really asked them that they were concerned at the small numbers that their school had, so they really are responding to a recommendation from CSAB during the interview process. So that is the recommendation, and you have in your material how big they will be increasing.
Okay. Any questions? All right, this will come back for a vote in June.
Okay.
And then I'm going to jump down to our final item, EICS 8, and Dr. Nancy Barber is going to talk to us about our newest applications for our Restart School model.
Good morning. Yes, in your discussion item today, you have 2 school systems. Guilford County Schools submitted 9 restart applications, and Nash Rocky Mount submitted 3. And we are engaging members of the Educator Support Services staff to read these over the next month, and we'll bring them forward to you next month for action, we hope, and approval.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I was distracted for about 10 seconds.
It's okay.
So the Guilford County and
Nash Rocky
and Nash
Mount.
Rocky, okay,
Yes,
I want to make
ma'am.
sure Nash Rocky Mount was on.
They did.
Okay,
Okay.
very good.
Thank
Any
you.
questions?
Those are good things.
All right, good. This will come back next month. And Chairman Kobe, that concludes our report.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. And now I turn to Mr. Chastain. I recognize you for the Business Operations Committee report.
Thank you, Chairman Kobe. My name's Todd Chastain. I serve alongside our Business Operations Committee Chair, Greg Alcorn, better known as Dr. ROI now, as an honorary title. And
Thank you.
you're welcome, Greg. We have 2 actions on first read. The first one relates to a career and technical education program expansion grant report. And we have John Kirkman, who's going to briefly update us on that.
Good morning. I just want to take a few minutes and update you. The Education and Workforce Innovation Program was transferred to the Department of Public Instruction in the fall. That group is currently administering 2 grants. We had 1 set of grants which the program was already administering that came to us, which was focused on STEM. That grant is now in its 4th year. We receive reports from all those grant recipients, the districts that are doing that. They're continuing to make great strides in the implementation of this grant to expand their STEM programs and STEM initiatives within those school districts. Back in January, I came before you with a group of LEAs for the second grant program that's being administered through the EWIC, which was the CT expansion grant. We have 14 school districts we identified at that point to receive these grants. Those school districts are moving forward with putting in and expanding their middle grade CTE programs, either by hiring additional CTE teachers at the middle grades level or employing career development coordinators to provide career development services to middle grade students to enhance their opportunities at the middle school also. Those districts will be providing us some additional information and a report as a part of their career and technical education federal and state applications this May, and then we will be back before this group in the fall to follow up on the findings of that, and also to move forward, because that is a 7-year grant that those school districts receive, and so we will be continuing to track them and monitor their progress as they move forward with implementing that grant. Are there any questions?
Mr. Kirkman, any comments, questions? So based on that, I move that the board approve the Career and Technical Education Grant Report.
Okay, motion by Mr. Chastain, second by Ms. Taylor. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed, no. Motion stands approved. Mr. Chastain.
Thank you.
Point of clarification, Guilford County was not one of those 14 counties.
Let me double check. I apologize. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but it's in there, included in the report.
To be clear. Thank you.
No, sir.
Okay, Mr. Chastain.
Agreed. BSOP 2 relates to the Ernst & Young Comprehensive Operational Assessment of DPI. They spent months on that assessment, and we received a report from Ernst & Young. And then Tuesday, we had another extensive overview and presentation of the Ernst & Young report. So based on that, I move that the board accept the Ernst & Young assessment report and approve the DPI summary of that report for submission to the General Assembly.
Okay, motion by Mr. Chastain. Is there a second?
I second.
A second by Dr. Oxendine.
You're going to allow discussion on that motion, just if you don't?
If you want.
I just
Yes.
want to make, I'm going to vote for the motion, by the way, so. I just want to just say, I last evening, reflecting on kind of those 2 days that we had together, we had 3 presentations that it just seemed to me to really interrelate. And one of those, we were talking about transforming this department so that it has the capacity to deliver. But then there were 2 other presentations, and ironically, one of them was called North Carolina Transformation Project that we saw from Gary Henry, that I thought was, for me, is compelling in terms of a lot of things that we have to be able to have the capacity to do. Another one was whole child. The things we saw was they brought that whole child presentation before us. So I just want to say that all of that is interrelated. All of us have heard and participated in our sidebar conversations where all of us have aspirational things as well. Quite frankly, I'm concerned about rural North Carolina, rural America, quite frankly, but rural North Carolina, and a lot of things that needs in rural North Carolina. But a lot of us, whether it's just making sure that we have data-based, research-based needs that we can address. We have things going on like digital learning and the things around. Last night, we heard an outgoing member say that we have thousands of kids that are just getting left behind. And so I hope that as we move forward, I just want to put a placeholder as part of this, that as we move forward, the process is that we're not through. And as we build this capacity here, that it's capacity to be able to deliver on a lot of things that we're talking about that are not trivial. They are very important. So I want to make sure that we're connecting those dots. And in some ways, we haven't even collected the dots, or at least in my mind, I haven't collected those dots. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to point that out, because as we move forward, there's still more opportunity to have input.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Ready to vote? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed, no. You had another motion in connection with the Ernst & Young report.
Again, related to that report and what you said, Mr. McDivitt, I move that pursuant to the Ernst & Young report recommendation 18, the board approved the establishment of transition management office with DPI leadership making recommendations for structure and reporting by the June board meeting.
Okay. Motion to establish transformation office and have the superintendent and his staff get back with us as to a plan relative to that. Is that
second.
Okay. Is there a second?
I think I heard it.
Greg did.
Okay, Mr. Alcorn seconds. And thank you for all your work, Ms. Alcorn, on this. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? No. The motion stands approved. In connection with this, before I turn back to you, Mr. Chastain, and related to the question that was asked by Dr. Oxendine yesterday, I'm establishing a special committee on DPI transformation. And Mr. Davis has agreed to chair it. Mr. Alcorn's agreed to be the vice chair. And the following individuals have agreed to be on it: Mr. McDivitt, Ms. Taylor, and Mr. Chastain. And this committee will be the board's representative to intersecting with the transformation office, and also the standing committees, as it involves issues for those standing committees. And as a special committee, as soon as the transformation process is over, it will cease to exist. So, Mr. Chastain, I turn back to you.
Yeah, we have one discussion item, BSOP 3. It's a policy amendment related to program enhancement teacher allotment. And here to present is Ms. Schaus.
Thank you. This is a discussion item related to Session Law 2018-2, which is otherwise known as House Bill 90. It relates to a change in the classroom teacher allotment to account for K-5 program enhancement teachers. The allocation is actually effective for the next fiscal year, July 1, 2018, but it isn't being included in our planning allocations for information for the school districts. And you do have that information in your attachment 3 in your materials. To give an overview of House Bill 90, there are really 3 portions to it. It provides funding for K-5 program enhancement teachers. It modifies the K-3 class size maximums, both the average and the individual class size maximums. And then it adds an exception to those K-3 class size maximums. So first of all, the definition included in the policy as part of the special provisions is for a program enhancement teacher, and we are talking about those that teach arts, that is dance, music, theater, visual arts, and physical education, and then also physical education and health teachers, world language teachers, and then others defined by the State Board of Education, which at this time we do not have any additional definition to add to that. The allotment ratio, and it is included in this policy, is 1 teacher for every 191 average daily membership in K-5. This ratio, I do believe, was based on the data that was provided to the General Assembly based on last year, so it is based on actual data. It is phased in over a 4-year period. So in 2018-19, that would be next fiscal year, the school districts will receive 25% of full funding. And if you look at the attachment 3, you can see how much it would be per school district if it was fully funded next year, and how much they will receive in 18-19. So they will receive 25% of that allocation next year, 50% in 19-20, 75% in 2021, and then full funding in 21-22. So to give a perspective of the number of teachers, if it were to be fully funded this year, that would account for 3,785. So we will be allotting out there 953.5 teachers out to the school districts at 25% funding. There are transfers restrictions on the K-5 program enhancement teacher positions, and that is included in this policy. They will be allocated in the PRC, the program report code, that has other classroom teacher positions. And the K-5 program enhancement teacher positions may be used for K-12 classroom teachers at this time. And but they may not be transferred out of that allocation. So they can be used for regular classroom teachers, but for no other purpose. The regular classroom teacher positions can still be converted at the A00, the beginning step of the teacher schedule, and can be used for other purposes, although very few school districts use that conversion. Secondly, the class size reduction phase-in. There was a lot of discussion and concern from school districts going from the current class size average maximums to the allotted ratios, which is what the law prior to House Bill 90 stated. There is along with the phase-in of the funding, there is a phase-in in K-3 class size reduction. This current year, the average class size for K-3
across the school district is 1 to 20 students, and an individual class size cannot exceed 1 to 23. That will remain in place for next fiscal year, and then for 2019-20, it will be reduced by 1. Each of those numbers will be reduced by 1. So the average class size across the LEA will be no greater than 1 to 19. The individual class shall not be greater than 1 to 22. And then in 2021, it will reduce again by 1. And then for it will be required to be at the allotment, the average class size will be required to be at the allotment ratio in 21-22. So that is the phase-in of the funding. At full funding, then the school districts will be required to be at the allotment ratio for their average class size. The final item that is included in the policy is the exceptions to class size. Currently, the dual language immersion classes are excluded from the class size maximums. This is by law. And in addition, the restart schools, and there are temporary exemptions for schools that are participating in the Advanced Teaching Roles pilot program and the teacher compensation models, as well as the LIFT schools in Charlotte-Mecklenburg and the Career Pathway program in Pitt. Those will expire when those programs have come to the end. But the House Bill 90 adds to that exemption the program enhancement classes. Last year, the State Board instituted a waiver Form B that provided an exclusion at the LEA's option for those program enhancement areas, but now those are in law as being excluded from the maximums. So those items are included in the proposed policy that is presented to you today for discussion and will be brought to you next month for action.
Ms. Schaus, any questions for Ms. Schaus? Great job. ESOP 4 is an item of information, just an update on the Bertie County Financial Recovery Plan. Ms. Schaus is back to that one.
Switching roles a little bit. So for the Bertie County schools, this time last year, I presented to you the financial status of Bertie County schools as of June 30th, 2016. They were in significant financial difficulty and had a steep decline in their financial health between 2014 and 2016. At the end of the 2016, based on their audited financial statements, they had a deficit fund balance of over $700,000, and they had an unassigned fund balance deficit of over $800,000. In addition, they had overexpended their revenues by, I believe it was over $1 million. They also had in their financial statements numerous material weaknesses, as well as a management letter which went into further detail as to some of the deficiencies that they had in their internal controls and their procedures. In response to those findings, we met with Bertie County Schools. They were very responsive and wanted to partner with us, and we required them to present a comprehensive written financial recovery plan, which was presented to the State Board last year for their acceptance. The recovery plan required them to put out a proposal of their elimination of their deficit, how they were going to restructure their financial operations, implement internal controls, and come into compliance with state and federal regulations, as well as a timeline on that. They had requested at that time a 5-year implementation to accomplish the goals. And the board had accepted that timeline. It was very important to both the school and the board at that time that the current population of students were not harmed by significant budget reductions, and that they could implement over that 5-year period. So the item today is an information item to provide an update on the financial status of Bertie County Schools. You do have a summary of where they stand at this time in the attachment attachment 1, as well as the request for their financial plan in attachment 2, which was last year, as well as their response dated April 13th, 2017. They have gone through significant changes. They had a new superintendent in January 2017, Dr. Hill, who was the author of that plan, as well as a new finance officer, Lisa Rabin. And that superintendent, Dr. Hill, has moved on, and they had an interim during a period of time of the year, and has recently newly appointed a superintendent, Dr. Edmonds, in February of 2018. Their finance officer remains constant, and although they have had changes in leadership during that time, there has been a continued focus on the financial health and improving the financial management throughout that change in leadership. So we do not see any concern with that. Based on the discussion with Bertie County Schools, they made changes, as they had stated in their recovery plan, for both the revenues and the expenditures. On the revenue side, they have made sure that they are maximizing their use of state, federal, and local funds, and ensuring that they were realizing all the revenues that they had the opportunity to have, and that was rightly theirs. In addition, they have ensured that they have very minimal reversions, which was an issue prior. On the expenditure side, it is clear they've made some difficult decisions in bringing the expenditures in line with their declining average daily membership, and they have had significant reductions in staff at the schools and the central office. They have put in significant improvements in their financial management, and we have received based on our fiscal monitoring review, their financial manuals, revised policies, reconciliations, budget amendments, inventories. There does remain 5 material weaknesses, most of which are repeat. But keep in mind that this is as of the audited financial statement as of June 30th, 2017, and as they continue to make progress and changes, they may have instituted and corrected some of those material weaknesses that were cited by the auditor. You can see in that summary that they have exceeded the expectation that they had for themselves in improving their financial position. They have this deficit of $700,000 in their general fund is now just under $300,000. A deficit of $300,000. So they have a positive change of over $400,000. Their unassigned balance, general fund balance, has gone from a deficit of $800,000 to $350,000, which is obviously a significant improvement. And they will exceed that. They will meet their goals if they stay on the same track prior to the 5-year. Their fund balance available as of a percentage of expenditures, this is required to be at 8%. In 15-16, it was at a negative 20%. It is at the end of 2017, it is at a negative 12%. So they have made a significant progress, but they are still short of the 8%. So it is not just a matter of getting to a zero balance. They are required to have that 8% fund balance available as a percentage of expenditures. They did have a positive revenue over expenditures of $400,000 as opposed to that negative 1.3. So that they have made significant changes. And as I said, they have that most of that was done through a reduction of staff and realizing the revenues that were available to them. So, in short, I would state that they have made the changes that they stated they were going to make, that it is showing in the numbers, and that we will continue to monitor them like we do all school districts, but we will monitor them and make sure that they continue on this path to financial health.
Thank you, Ms. Just. We appreciate your capacity for nuance and detail. These are not easy topics, and you do a great job, so we really appreciate that. That's all for the Business Operations Committee. We have the update on contracts, if you have any questions.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Chastain. Before we move on to our final committee, I noticed that we have a distinguished North Carolinian in our audience, so would former State Senator Howard Lee please stand and be recognized? Not only a former state senator, but former chairman of this board for a number of years, and as a fellow Chapel Hillian, he got his start in politics as being mayor of Chapel Hill, and he's a very good friend who I can report is still involved in improving public education through his foundation. So thank you, Senator. We appreciate all you've done and all you stand for and contributed to our state. And got a lot of other friends here too, right? Next I'll turn to Dr. Oxendine for the Educator Standards and Practices Committee report.
Thank you, Chairman Kobe. I am Olivia Oxendine, and I chair this committee. Alongside me is Mr. Eric Davis. This month we have 3 action items. They were each one presented last month. They're coming back today for our vote and our action. ES&P 1, conversion of initial professional license to the continuing professional license policy. Just a thumbnail of that particular policy. It pertains to all the requirements that an individual must complete in order for that conversion to take place. And in a nutshell, it's that the individual must pass all the testing requirements and, of course, the coursework requirements. And there is some specific language around whether or not that individual must take part in the beginning teacher support program. So this particular item has relevance to LINC 003, 001, and TCED 006. I move that the board approve this policy.
Motion by Dr. Oxendine, second by Mr. Davis. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Anybody opposed, no. No. The motion stands approved. Dr. Oxendine.
And the second item, policy, it's pertaining to policy LICN 006, amendments to align with statute. This is the experience degree credit for salary purposes. And in a nutshell, on that particular item, the language pertains to specific language around credit for salary, explains the calculation method, defines the calendar year, how to combine various types of credit, clarifies the effect of part-time work, college teaching, relevant non-teaching, military experience as it relates to those who teach in the JTROC, and a statement explaining the agency's auditing responsibilities. So I move that we approve this policy as well.
Motion by Dr. Oxendine, second by Mr. Davis. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed, no. Motion stands approved. Dr. Oxendine.
And the third and final action item pertains to LICN 007, amendments to align with statute, licensure suspension, revocation. In a nutshell, thumbnail, this policy pertains to those particular actions, conditions under which these actions are likely, methods of notice to the employee, 9 reasons for suspension and revocation, the duration of suspension or revocation, language around the reinstatement of the license, and the SBE responsibility to notify other states of suspension, denial, revocation, surrender, or reinstatement. I move that we approve this policy.
Motion by Dr. Oxendine, second by Ms. Taylor. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed, no. The motion stands approved. Dr.
And the
Oxendine.
final two items are discussion items, career and technical education licensure manual amendments, and I believe that is going to be briefly presented by Mr. Kirkman. He's coming forward. Thank you.
Good morning again. Just want to take a few minutes to talk to you about some changes that we're proposing for career and technical education licensure. We provided 4 documents for you to reference. One of those is a summary of changes, which I will spend quite a bit of time talking about this morning. You have a version of the new manual that we're proposing. You have a strike-through version of the manual. I will tell you it is a little tricky to read with all the strike-throughs in it and the text, so we provided both copies for you. And then, of course, a copy of the new policy that we're proposing with the changes we want to make to LICN 001 and remove about 60 pages of CTE information out of that and putting into a separate policy and create a manual, which should make it much easier for the districts, the human resources and CTE staff to work with CTE licensure. The other reason for this is, as you know, CTE is continually changes. Business and industry is continually changing as it relates to CTE, and we strive very hard to make sure that we remain consistent with the expectations of business and industry and the quality of certifications and teachers that we have in those areas. And so we can maintain that in an effective manner. That's why we would like to do that. Let us keep up with the demands of business and industry around our teachers and the requirements for our students as far as those things are concerned. If you would just take a minute, I do want to take a few minutes and go through the summary of changes with you around some of the changes that we're looking to make. One of the large changes that we're going to do is we're going to put this into a manual. When we pull it into the manual, we're going to create hyperlinks so that when they click on that information, they can link directly to it, which will make it much simpler as they're looking up information and using that manual. The other pieces around clarification, around restricted layout. As you know, CTE is one of the areas where we can employ teachers that do not have, or individuals that do not have a bachelor's degree. We can hire individuals that have work experience and an associate degree or high school diploma for our classes and restrict them so they cannot teach other things outside of CTE or the areas in which we hire them to teach. The other thing that we're doing is we're clarifying, making a couple of technical corrections around some of the credentials. As you know, industry credentials change, so we want to move and change to those appropriate credentials and clarify that in certain cases that our teachers must have those industry credentials before they can teach instead of securing them during their teaching tenure. We were proposing to retire 3 licenses, carpentry, electrical trades, and masonry. We're going to retire those and create a new license called construction and hopefully simplify that for the districts. I think they will appreciate that and encapsulate those all under one area of construction. As we find, we're using NCCR materials for that. All the teachers go through NCCR. The only thing that changes for that is pretty much the content, if it's electrical or construction or carpentry. But the content is the same, so it made sense for us to give some flexibility to the districts to collapse that into one license and may make it easier for them to find teachers, but also expand current programs that they may have. So if they've got a carpentry program, they want to add electrical trades or masonry or HVAC, then it would make it much easier for them to do that if we just had that one construction license. The other change that is significant that we want to do is around the 711 CTE Director's License. We currently have 2 routes for licensure where someone with a CTE background may become a CTE director, or a principal may become a CTE director and have a CTE license. For those that have a CTE background, we currently ask them to complete 9 semester hours of coursework. We give them 15 hours to choose from. What we have found is we're having a difficult time finding AHEs that will continue to have the numbers to support to offer those classes. And so what we have proposed is to reduce that from 9 hours to 3 hours, make it consistent with what we asked the principals to do. And to offset those additional 6 semester hours of coursework, we're going to expand and add a second level to our existing administrative induction program, and do 2 levels. That will take approximately 80 hours, which would be very equivalent to the same content that they would receive through the additional 6 semester hours of coursework.
Do we have questions or comments? I have a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
So you're discussing, and we'll come back to the board for action next month, changes in the policy, in the licensure manual.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that correct?
Right.
But part of that is making some changes in not just the manual, but the policy per se, or is it all inclusive?
Well, what it would do is currently CTE licensure is included in LICN 001. And of course, there's about 60 pages, which includes all of the CTE in the manual. And so what we're going to do is pull that out and create a separate policy just for that encapsulates that manual.
Very good.
Which would be CTE.
Thank you, that clarifies it, got ya. Okay, very good. And so we will act on that next month, board.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Oxenham.
And the last item pertains to LICN 003, the Ed TPA, the cut scores for Ed TPA and the PPAT, and Dr. Seiberg is coming forward to present this item.
Morning, Chairman Kobe, Superintendent Johnson, members of the board. This item for discussion is set to set a cut score for the Ed TPA and PPAT pedagogy assessments, and those changes are going to reside in policy LICN 003. We're currently in a multi-year rollout of these 2 exams across all the IHEs in the state, and ultimately that's going to lead to them, those 2 exams being required for licensure in the 2019-2020 year. This year and next year, each institution is submitting a third of their candidates to national scoring on one of these 2 instruments as a part of that process. So while these assessments are non-consequential until 2019 and 2020, setting the cut score will help for 2 reasons. One is it'll set a goal for the field to have a target to work towards. And second is it'll allow candidates who do reach or exceed that cut score to be exempt from having to take a currently in place pedagogy assessment called the Principles of Learning and Teaching, the PLT. And that currently is a requirement of all secondary candidates. The initial cut scores were set using guidance from the test vendors and leveraging their national data set. And in summer of 2019, we're going to review the North Carolina data that we're collecting this year and next year to add that as information towards the possibility of a further refinement of these cut scores as needed at that time.
Very good. Any questions or comments? What I'm taking away from this item, I think I'm correct in this, is, board members, is that passing this policy will also help us reduce the cost of some of these licensing tests that are beginning to be a burden on our candidates out of our teacher ed programs and our, well, teacher ed programs specifically. So this one really has dollar-cents values out there to our future teachers. So that will be coming back again next month for our action. That concludes my report.
Well, thank you, Dr. Oxendine, and I thank all the presenters today, including those who traveled here to be with us. Board members, that concludes our committee meetings for the day. And now I recognize Ms. Cecilia Holden for the legislative update.
Thank you, and good morning still. I'll try to keep it to the 2 hours that Betsy allotted me before she departed. tell. I stand before you and lunch and departure and a nice reception, so I will try to keep it brief. There has been a lot of activity in downtown Raleigh since I was last before you, so I'll do my best to try to capture that in a brief period of time this morning. The General Assembly is set to convene for the short session, and that will begin on May the 16th at 12 o'clock. But they have not been idle in the meantime. They've had a number of committee meetings that I'll report to you on today. They use these committee meetings as an opportunity to discuss a variety of different topics and then to propose different legislative items. So what I'll do is I'll share with you where these committees have been and some items that we might see coming forward in the short session. In terms of what the General Assembly is able to take up in the short session, entirely new bills are not eligible. They can certainly take any bill that is eligible, gut it, and do what they want to with it, but they cannot take up a brand new bill. I sent to you, there's a link that shares with you all of the eligible bills if you would like to track those. Certainly I will do my job to keep you apprised of anything that's floating through the session, and we'll work with the staff and you all to solicit input as things move forward. Some of the bills that are eligible will include certainly a budget bill that would have any expansion items or any modifications, study committee bills, appointment bills, gubernatorial actions, such as those with nominations or appointments, and bills authorized by a joint resolution that had more than 2/3 vote, and then pension or retirement bills. So like I said, I'll certainly keep you posted on what I see coming and any bills that might get some traction. If I can walk you through, we've had a variety of committee meetings that have been related to K-12 education. You've heard a lot of different things this week already. I'll try to get into more of the legislative front on those. One very important topic for you all and our schools and our children is that of safety. The House formed a school safety committee, and from there they had two sub-working groups. One was focused on student health working group, and the other was focused on student physical safety and security. For the student health working group, they came forward with a series of findings and recommendations, and I'll try to give you a brief overview of those. I have Kim Martin with me today, as well as Ben Matthews. If we have any detailed discussion that needs to occur, they might be able to speak to more detail than I am. The one recommendation came out was that they would propose draft legislation that would offer a reciprocity agreement for school psychologists. So if you had a school psychologist that meets the national standards or national testing, they would have a reciprocal agreement with North Carolina so they could also receive that license here in the state. The other was to work toward a goal of meeting recommended national staffing levels for student support positions. I'm thrilled to say that in your budget, you included items that specifically speak to that. So hopefully we will see something coming forward in the short session. Another item that was on their list of recommendations was a threat assessment team to be formed and to put together a threat assessment that would be implemented throughout the state in the different schools. The next is a peer-to-peer counseling, student counseling program, and that was proposed to be implemented in middle and high schools. We have been asked as a department to provide input on legislation that's coming forward. So the DPI team has certainly provided as much input as we're in a position to do on both of those items. The next is to develop a plan to coordinate care among the different mental health support professionals. There's a series of different support personnel that play into the school systems, from your social workers, school psychologists, nurses. All of those have a place, and they have some overlap, but they also have distinct roles and responsibilities. And so it would be to try to make sure that they're working in concert. And then the last one, and Ms. Martin alluded to this yesterday, was the anonymous reporting tip line. So I do anticipate that we will see something come forward on that. That also was in your state board expansion budget request. On the physical safety and security working group, the recommendations that came from the subcommittee included to study armed security options for non-public schools, study expansion and requirements of volunteer school resource officer program, extend mandatory safety plan and drill requirement to all public schools, and encourage non-public school participation, implement training and continued education requirement for the school resource officers, to appropriate the additional $1.8 million to fund the grants. Ms. Martin alluded to that as well. This would cover those where we had grant applicants but did not have the additional funding for those. Require facility vulnerability assessments for each school building, and that was alluded to, Mr. McDevitt, in some of your comments yesterday. Require LEAs to report annually on the placement of the school resource officers and the numbers around the state. So those were the key items that were taken up in the safety working groups and that I anticipate seeing something come forward in the short session. The next committee meeting was the Joint Legislative Program Evaluation Oversight Committee, and they came forward with a nurses study in 2017, and the nurses study was presented to this committee this year. There again, you actually have an item in your expansion budget that will address trying to get towards a standard in terms of the number of nurses in the schools. There were several recommendations that came from the study. The department responded and is in concert with the recommendations that came out of this working group. The first was to update the school nursing staffing standard, and they've requested that the state board update that. The next would be that the Departments of Health and Human Services and Public Instruction prepare a plan to consolidate the two state school nurse funding programs into a single entity. We currently have some nurses that are funded out of the department and other Department of Public Instruction and others out of Health and Human Services, and to align those and bring forward a plan. The next would be for the Department of Health and Human Services to examine the Medicaid rates for school nursing services and to determine whether or not those rates should be increased in order to encourage the LEAs to submit Medicaid claims for these services. I think that they were anticipating that they were too low for them to actually submit for the reimbursement. The next was for Department of Health and Human Services to request a Medicaid state plan amendment that would authorize Medicaid reimbursement for school-based nursing services documented in an individual health plan or a 504 plan. There was a draft bill that has been proposed, and there again, it includes these items, and our department has provided input and is in favor of these. The Program Evaluation Oversight Committee has this on their May 14th agenda for the committee to decide if they want to move this forward in the short session. The other item that came out of the Joint Legislative Program Evaluation Oversight Committee this week was that they wanted to recommend allowing the two virtual charter schools to remain open through 2023. And the purpose is in order to see if they, how they're working and to give them more time to figure that out. The next committee is on the Joint Legislative Task Force on Education Finance Reform. They've held a number of meetings. The department has been heavily involved in presentations and input for that committee. The presentations that they've heard so far include program evaluation, looking at the allotment specific and system level issues. The Education Commission on the States presented on the components of high quality funding system for North Carolina school funding. We had Alexis Schaus and Adam Levinson both present. Adam presented a response to the PED study, and Alexis presented on school business processes. The local perspective was also presented, both for traditional funding as well as for charter school funding. And then they looked at the weighted student funding formulas by Edunomics Lab. So at this time, what they've done is they've moved forward with more than anything, receiving information. So there's no action that I anticipate coming out of this committee except further review of the current school funding. So we may see something in the long session, but I don't anticipate a short session item here. The next committee is on the division of local school administrative units, and there is a bill that is eligible to be taken up in the short session, and it pertains to allowing certain towns to operate charter schools, and that is Matthews and Mint Hill. However, the committee studied what the benefits or concerns would be of actually breaking up, and the specific districts that they looked at were Wake and Charlotte Meck. And the committee did not come forward with any recommendations for the short session. The specific findings and recommendations, one was on academic research on LEA and school size. And the review found that there was no documented relationship between the LEA size and student outcomes, but there is inference to smaller school size contributing to improved student performance. The next was on innovative school programs, and the findings were that there was documentation that would prove that improvements in student outcomes do result from innovative programs in our schools. Next was decision points to consider, and one of those was implementation and governance issues, as well as the logistical considerations in counties with multiple school units. And so we had the department present from a multitude of different angles. We had our business operations team presenting. They looked at the architect for school planning, public school insurance, transportation services, school nutrition, IT, and then legal. They had concerns that were discussed as it pertains to equality in the school systems. Additional study was needed, and that was basically what they ended up with at the end of the committee meetings. They did suggest, however, that consolidation of certain services might be advantageous, and so they recommended that the committee recommended that previous studies go back and be reviewed in order to determine whether or not there might be an opportunity to reduce cost and increase efficiency, because there's some prior work that had been done on that. And then finally, in regards to the exceptional children funding, the committee recommended information generated regarding the LEAs that are in excess of the current 12.75% that's allowed for your exceptional children funding. And they asked for that to be shared with the House Education Subcommittee on Education Appropriations and Senate Education. And the state allotment, as I mentioned, is the 12.75% of the average daily membership in an LEA. And there are 60 LEAs that currently have costs that exceed the state limit and require local funding. The final committee that I will report on is the Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Committee. There was nothing specific that's coming out in legislation where the Department of Public Instruction weighed in. However, certainly there are impacts to us. The committee highlighted the work of the University of North Carolina System for Leadership in developing post-secondary educational opportunities for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And the last thing was that it addresses opportunities for education and employment for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So with that, what I will do is share with you, I do have a number of technical corrections. I have a number of legislative requests. We certainly have your budget. All of these things are items that I'm working with the General Assembly members on. I'm doing it with input from the state board, input with the Department of Public Instruction, input from the local education agencies, whether it's principals, teachers, administrators, of all different types, to try to make sure that we present forward any things that might drive efficiencies or help to make our schools operate better for the students. So I am sharing all of that information, and you have those as well. With that, I will ask, are there any questions on this before I pause and do a few slides for you on some other work that we've been working on during the off session?
If I might.
Okay, Dr. Oxenham.
I just want to, publicly thank Ms. Holden for doing something over with, I think it was Representative Patricia Hurley and Representative Horn, and that this goes back to the cursive writing and the multiplication facts study. Along with DPI representatives, went over and spent some time reassuring them that this law is being passed, is underway, being implemented. And also in that discussion, and I've got to share this information because it was an oversight on my part, Out of the study that DPI conducted on this particular law, 109 LEAs out of 115 responded to a survey, and I think that is really commendable. So I want to thank her. I want to thank the staff here, the instructional staff, and anyone else that I'm missing who has a role to play in convincing and reassuring our legislators that laws are being attended to and they are being implemented to the fullest extent possible. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you. It was certainly with the efforts of the staff. We, Christy Lynch-Ebert and team worked weekends and Easter and all of the other pieces to make sure that we were able to report out the facts and to represent the schools well.
It's going to be an annual report, I understand.
That is certainly being proposed. On that note, I will go back to a prior committee meeting where Mr. McDevitt asked about our reports, and we now have over 130 reports, and I think it's fair to say that most of the legislation that we'll see in the short session has reporting also attached to it. I've provided several of the legislators our list of reports and asked when they add one if there's an opportunity to peel off 5 or 10, that would also be great. Because often they just get added on top of it, and if they can look and see what their priorities are in regards to accountability and our reporting, that's where we want to spend our time. We do have limited resources, but we want to respond to their needs and make sure that they understand legislation is being implemented as they expect it to be. So with that, one of the items that is on your state budget expansion list pertains to the homework gap. And we have talked about a number of things in the last 3 days and ongoing. This does not start with Cecilia. This started way before me. There has been work underway on this topic for many years and across the state, nonprofit, for-profit, government, state, federal, et cetera. So I certainly want to give the shout outs to all those people that led this effort way before I got here. But one of the things that has rung true to me, we are focused on the digital learning plan. We're focused on the ESSA plan. We're focused on career and technical education and virtual classrooms and all of these things. So if I can paint a picture for you just a minute and how that might relate to the classroom. You as board members, I looked around and I see all of the laptops popped up. And if you can think for just a second what it took to prepare for today's meeting. And y'all don't do this just showing up at the table. And you don't do it with a lot of trees being cut down anymore. That's not the way we operate. That's not the way we do business. There's a lot of back and forth because you don't just show up for 2 days each month. You go home and this work continues. But it requires access to the internet. It requires a computer. I have a high school student here in the public schools. Often, not once this year, but multiple times, she has assignments that are due midnight, Friday night on the internet. So this is where we are, and it's a good place to be. We just want to make sure that we're providing for all students as we move forward with these great ideas. So with that, if I can turn your attention to the presentation here, you'll go to the next slide for me. Thank you. As I mentioned, you have your ESSA plan. You've got your digital learning plan. Both of these were approved by the state board. One of the driving principles in there speaks to equity of educational opportunity. And equity means a lot of things, but one of those that we'll talk about today is digital equity. This week in the newspaper, there was an article about the homework gap. So this is a topic that is certainly getting a lot of focus. So what I'd like to do is to give you a visual. If you can bear with me for about 2 minutes, I've got a video that I think will sum up everything I want to say. And then I have about 3 more slides to cover. So if I can get you to click right there. Perfect.
You're getting ready to tell us that we need technology at that somewhere.
3279. That is correct. Welcome to today's academic challenge. You may only use what's on your table. There will be 3 rounds, and the questions will get harder. What is the largest animal living today? Team A.
Blue whale.
Team B.
Blue whale.
That is correct. What is the square root of 144?
12. 12.
Correct.
India.
India. Neil Armstrong.
Neil Armstrong. William Shakespeare.
Correct. You're tied. For round 2, we're going to give both teams some additional resources.
Yay.
Who was the first president to live in the White House?
John Adams.
That is correct.
Oh my God, bro.
What does the acronym LCD stand for?
Liquid crystal display.
Correct.
Sargasso Sea.
That's correct.
8 minutes and 20 seconds.
Correct.
Samuel Morse.
Correct.
Denver, Colorado. Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Salt Lake City, Utah.
That's correct. Let's pull back the curtain.
Are you kidding me? That's so not cool. I'm offended that they had such an unfair advantage. It was way too fast.
Please have your team captain open the envelope on the table.
70% of teachers assign homework requiring access to the internet, and yet 5 million households with school-age children do not have high-speed internet service at home. That just puts 5 million other people at a disadvantage, which is not okay.
Nearly 50% of students say they have been unable to complete a homework assignment because they did not have access to the internet or computer.
I didn't know that the percentage was so high. Everything he does is in the computer. So if he didn't have access to it, he wouldn't have a chance.
Someone may not be pulling the grade not because they're not smart, they just don't have access to what all the other kids have.
Oh, that's so good. Pretty much of a gut punch. You know, it's one of those where it's funny at first, and then all of a sudden it becomes real. So what does this mean for North Carolina? In the fall of last year, you heard from the Broadband Infrastructure Office that is out of the Department of Information Technology, and they've been focused on trying to work at this from an infrastructure perspective, because we've got a multitude of different things that play into the homework gap. It's not just a matter of a child not having a computer. In some cases in rural North Carolina, they may not actually have the physical access to be able to get the internet. In terms of what North Carolina's estimated numbers are, we're thinking that there may be around 30,000 high schoolers who don't have the internet access at home. And so I don't bring you a problem today. I want to share with you the things that y'all have been doing on this and share with you that it's not just a government issue. I think that it's a public-private partnership all the way around, and that there's a lot of opportunity that sits in front of us. If you can imagine trying to read all of the board materials on your cell phone, and I point that out on purpose because often I hear every kid has a cell phone. For the record, my 7th grade son does not. But most children do, I don't deny that. But they may not have the data and the service that's needed to be able to do all of their homework. But I can't imagine doing a PowerPoint presentation on a cell phone. So with that, I want to share with you that there are a lot of initiatives that are currently underway. You've got your digital learning plan, and you all have passed that. There's so much that is being done. Personalized learning is a big objective of the superintendents, and that plays into this. The Broadband Infrastructure Office, as I mentioned earlier, they have done a lot of different things, including convening stakeholder meetings around digital equity. They also recently, as in I think this week, were approved for a grant that they applied for actually when I was back in Commerce, and they have been given $250,000 in order to do some pilots where they will have loaner hotspots in libraries, so children can check those out. The Friday Institute conducted a survey to try to get their arms around how many students play into the homework gap. That was a very small survey. It needs to be blown out in order to really get our arms around it. MCNC provides the broadband infrastructure for our schools. You've got your North Carolina Business Committee for Education. They have been instrumental in partnering with me on this initiative. They are bringing private industry to the table. We have vendor grants that are already distributed across our school systems. We have several vendors who have come to us, one in particular who wants to partner at a statewide level, willing to offer free internet access or free cellular service and internet access for all economically disadvantaged high schoolers in North Carolina. And then we've got nonprofits who are doing refurbishing and donating laptops out to students who are in need. And then they provide digital learning or digital literacy training. We believe it's a three-pronged approach. The first is to understand the problem. And in order to do that, I've been speaking with the Friday Institute, who believes a feasibility study is needed to try to figure out, 1, infrastructure issues, 2, device and internet access issues from an affordability perspective, and then 3, oftentimes it's there, but why are people not adopting the new technology? The next is, several of our school systems are doing very innovative things. So we're not here to reinvent the wheel. We're trying to figure out what's working well, and what would it mean to take that out across the state. So we think that there's a catalog of solutions that we need to be able to figure out, put cost around it, figure out who our partners might be in trying to roll these solutions out to our students. And then the third thing is to be able to have some controlled pilots, because everybody wants to understand what's the outcome for the students. Are we doing the right things? And does it make a positive impact on the students? Some of the initiatives include Wi-Fi on the school buses. We have students who commute, in some cases, more than 2 hours each way. We've been working with the transportation team in DPI to try to get where are these schools and what can we try to put on these buses to be able to help with that. And then, of course, at the end of the day, digital literacy training that I mentioned earlier is instrumental, because in some cases, even the parents don't understand what this really can mean for a future. So what has the state board been doing about it, and what are others doing about it? You do have $1 million in the state board budget for non-recurring funds that would speak to the 3 things that I mentioned earlier, the 3-pronged approach. You also blessed me moving forward with applying for a grant from the State Employees Credit Union Foundation in the amount of $500,000. We hope to hear back on that in the July timeframe. We're working with other grant entities who have expressed interest if we're able to couple together some of these other fund sources. As I mentioned, the $250,000 in the library that DIT just got. The governor has a big ask in his budget that would address infrastructure, and specifically has spelled out the homework gap in this. And then public-private partnerships. You've got plenty of companies that want to come to the table, whether it's donating devices, donating services, or just bringing money to the table. So with that, what I'll do is I'll open it up to ask, are there any questions? Just know that there's a lot of work underway. We've got a long way to go, but I do appreciate your support in getting there. Any questions before we finish up today's meeting? Thank you.
That's a good project.
Thank you very much.
The video is
Appreciate the special initiative and all the information.
Mr. Chair, since Greg is not here, I'd like to just, not just since he's not here, but I'd like to say something. Greg is so humble, but Greg Alcorn has a project in his home county called AppSeed. And I would love for us to invite Greg to come tell us a little bit about it with a few minutes, because it is the precursor to this. He is providing devices to every pre-K kid out there in that county. And he's got an AppSeed Foundation, and now I just told you everything I know. So, but I would love to have Greg share with us, and I'm hearing it has had tremendous impact. The superintendent of that county made a report on it recently, and it may be a thing that we can model in advance of this. So. And I said that for Tricia and Amy. Pre-K, anything pre-K, I'll say.
That's great.
Okay. Well, we come to a special time at our board meeting. It's a little bit of a celebration, but it's a little bit of a sad time too. And this is to recognize the recently retired, as of April 30, so it's very recent, Director of Board Operations and Policy, Miss Betsy Lambert West. And if you would come forward, and I'm going to call on Ms. Tricia Willoughby to read a resolution that has been drafted for you. And this is interesting because I don't know how many years that Ms. West has drafted resolutions. 16 years of draft. And she served on, she's retiring after 46 years of state service and 16 years on the board staff. So, Ms. Willoughby, if you will.
Do you want me to read it
Yeah.
here or there? Or?
Well, you can read either place, yeah.
Up there. Yeah,
You want to read it off of the.
I have to put on my reading glasses.
No, you can't.
I do understand. And Miss West, I hope you appreciate it. We're read today in honor of you.
And I wore pink. Why would I wear pink when I went to NC State?
Well, it's a beautifully framed and well-earned resolution. North Carolina State Board of Education resolution honoring Betsy L. West for her outstanding service September of 1971 through April of 2018. I want you to just adjust that time period. Whereas the North Carolina State Board of Education takes pride in the extraordinary qualities and dedications of the citizens who have served public education through service to the North Carolina State Board of Education. Whereas Mrs. Betsy L. West has reflected these qualities in an exceptional manner during her service to the board as Director of Board Operations and Policy and as Assistant Executive Director. Whereas Mrs. West's service to the board has always been exemplary and always in good form, representing both the board and the Department of Public Instruction in many and varied leadership roles, including education planning and development consultant, State Board of Education legislative director, personnel analyst, special assistant for research and evaluation, computer systems coordinator, statistical research assistant, and social research assistant. Wow. And whereas Betsy West's unquestionable belief in the North Carolina constitutional promise that the people have a right to the privilege of education, and it is the duty of the state to guard and maintain that right, and that education is what safeguards democracy. And whereas her understanding that all children are precious informs her belief that those working in public school systems carry the responsibility of feeding the minds, mouths, and spirits of all children regardless of their circumstances, race, creed, gender, or socioeconomic status. And whereas Mrs. West's formal education in English and counselor education and induction as a Caldwell Scholar from her beloved North Carolina State University provided her with an exceptional foundation of high expectations that she has carried forward throughout her career, and especially for herself and colleagues in the preparation and presentation of board materials. And whereas the board understands that her gifts of attention to detail, organization, and drive for perfection have reflected the seriousness with which she approaches her work and her dedication to ensuring that all her board members are supported and prepared for the complex issues coming before them. And whereas Miss Betsy West's philosophy of being good and kind to everyone is expressed through her habit of building personal relationships with staff, board members, and others, she serves and reflects her genuine heart and deep appreciation for those around her. Now therefore be it resolved that the North Carolina State Board of Education expresses its heartfelt appreciation to Mrs. Betsy L. West for her tireless and unselfish service and dedication, and resolve that the board wishes Godspeed to Betsy West and her family as she turns her attention to other opportunities to continue her dedicated service to the children she so often refers to as our future. And resolve that the board expresses its highest praise for her service to the Department of Public Instruction, State Board of Education, the state of North Carolina and its 1.5 million public school children and 100,000 plus educators for some 46 years. And resolved that the board, influenced by Mrs. Betsy L. West's insight, grace, intellect, generosity of spirit, and unrelenting passion for education, directs the Secretary of the State Board of Education to enter a copy of this resolution into the official minutes of the State Board of Education, and that an appropriately signed copy be presented to Betsy L. West, who gave it her best every single day. Signed by Chairman Bill Kobe and Superintendent Mark Johnson.
Things, the board and board staff had a dinner honoring Betsy last night, and Mr. Wayne McDivitt presented her with the Order of the Longleaf Pine at that dinner. And I note that at 1:30 in room 150, there's going to be a reception for Betsy, and all are invited to attend that reception. And before I ask for an approval of this resolution, Betsy has made sure everybody that we honor gets a glass apple, so we have one.
Funny how that works. You get to pick out what you want one day.
There you go.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you.
Your own glass apple, and
I don't know how many of you actually ever get to see these out of the box, but they're quite lovely.
Oh, yeah.
and so I'll ask for a motion to approve the resolution.
So moved.
Ms. Willoughby, second, Mr. McDivitt. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Of course not.
I'll see you afterwards.
Okay, I want to invite all the
Please.
board and staff to come up.
Board
and
staff, if you
yeah,
will.
come on up for a picture with
Ms. West.
Ms. West. Ms. West, I was going to say Betsy, but
Yes, Betsy, thank you.
and I'll hold this with you. Okay.
Thank you.
And okay, good deal.
Okay, boys and girls.
Come on up. Come on up.
And we'll squeeze.
Yeah.
Two rows, that'll make it easier.
Okay.
We'll slide up.
So we'll just.
Okay.
Janice, come on up.
Two rows.
you and me.
Yeah.
We would join.
My jacket.
Okay, maybe we get a couple of people on this side. You want us to adjust some, or?
You good?
Okay.
Okay. I'm sort of prepared, but I do have a tissue in my hand.
You can stand over on this side, if you can get through.
Yeah. Let's move forward, yeah. Okay, that's good.
That work?
Okay.
Perfect, yep.
All right.
And 1, 2, and 3.
Do a couple more.
And 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, and 3.
Very good, thank you. Always so reliable. Thank you, Elaine.
Thank you.
Your cell phone number is in that resolution.
And before I ask for a motion to adjourn, I'm going to call on Ms. West to give us some departing thoughts.
Wisdom, I'm sure.
Wisdom, yes.
They don't
She's
know
been-
this side of me that has a sense of humor, I don't think. I thought a long time about it, about what would I say on my very last time in front of this body. First of all, I'd hope my palms would not sweat, because every board meeting, from the time it starts until the gavel came down on the last day of the meeting, my palms were so sweaty. Well, it was no different today. What if Deanna and I forgot this or forgot that? So thankfully, everything has gone well. But in thinking about it, I wanted to say, having a job is a privilege. Someone offers you their money to come in and do something for them. And this has been worthy work. And I hit the jackpot. I got to work in a building full of the most fabulous people I could have asked to have been associated with ever in the whole world. And that's not a slight to any other branch of government or any other private industry. I just really got lucky. And I won the double lottery when I got to come to the board office, because I spent the first part of my career in the controller's office and in the Department of Public Instruction. And I think I've worked in every organizational area that there has been. I actually started in, what was Management Information Systems, which was a computer thing, but I don't know why they put me there, but they did, thankfully. And it blossomed into this fabulous opportunity to serve the citizen body that's named in the Constitution, the only constitutionally named board. And I am a product of public schools, and without my education, I would have still been in Clayton, North Carolina, which was a wonderful place to grow up, but was a true mill town. That is all gone, and I worry so much about, the families that was their life, and it was a good life. But my education has allowed me to come to this place and do what tiny part I could to see to it that so many other children would have the opportunity to rise and to improve their lives financially and in many other ways through the strength of education or skills training. It doesn't all have to be degrees. But I've served with 38 different board members, and I've had 4 fabulous chairmen, starting with Phil Kirk, who had a tough time in my life when I wasn't sure. That I could keep working because of illness in my family. Said repeatedly, when I tried to tell him I may have to leave him, he said, "Don't worry about your job." How gracious he was to allow me the few months I needed to get back on my feet. Then there was the wonderful Howard Lee, whom I actually met when I was 20, and his first foray into politics was he was elected as the president of the Graduate Student Association while he was a graduate student. But I met him when I was a Caldwell Fellow at NC State, and he had spoken to the group. And then to get to serve with him later, followed by Bill Harrison, whom is unabashed about his love for children and public education, and then to end up with the great Bill Kobe.
Great.
I've just been double blessed, more than anybody deserves to be. But all my friends and colleagues here, you've just been a part of my other family that I also didn't get to choose. But I got pretty lucky on that also. And to my children who could not be here today, thank you. It was important for me to show them you can work and be a mother. You can be I hope, a good wife. You can be active in your church and community. I don't know that they will repeat all of that. But, there were times I probably should have been there for them, and I always put this place first, maybe sometimes when I shouldn't. But they've been wonderful children. I mean, I've been blessed in so many ways. What do I have to complain about? Not one thing. And you've all been part of that blessing. So thank you. I'm standing between you and lunch and getting on the road and cake and whatever we're going to have at 1:30, but thank you from the very bottom of my heart.
After we have a motion to adjourn, rather than me banging the gavel, we're going to let that.
My palms will stop sweating.
Right.
Banging on our heads.
Yeah. You've come to the end. Okay. A motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Dr. Oxendise moves. Second by Mr. Duncan. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. The motion stands approved, and we stand adjourned.
I'll drive over to Chapel.